Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbaugh. Today, we've got two rock books for you. One is about the great Joni Mitchell, and the other a memoir by Stewart Copeland, the drummer from the Police. And a common theme shared between the two books is this idea of trying to fit into an identity, a role, trying to play a part. In the Joni Mitchell book, biographer and NPR writer Ann Powers talks about how she could code switch between feminine and masculine identities, and eventually that bled into the music. But we'll start with Stewart Copeland. His memoir is titled Stewart Copeland's Police Diaries, and in this interview with NPR's Leila Fadel, he talks about being a punk poser. He literally calls himself a fake punk, and how liberating it was to finally escape from that baggage. That's ahead.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from BetterHelp. It's easy to compare your life to everyone else's, but comparison is the thief of joy. Therapy can help you focus on what you need to live your best life instead of dreaming about someone else's. Give BetterHelp Online Therapy a try. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing at betterhelp.com/NPR.
19th, Sunday, bed cold.
For most of us, the average calendar entry is made up of mundane details.
The 22nd, up early, laundry, office, sunny.
But in 1977, Stewart Copeland's life was about to become anything but mundane.
21st, Tuesday, rehearse with Sting. Ride home plus Paul.
Did you hear that? Sting. Rehearse with Sting. Stewart Copeland played drums for the Police. And while they were becoming one of the biggest rock bands in the world, Copeland was keeping a constant written record. Calendar entries, accounting ledgers, notes. He's turned those into a new book, Stewart Copeland's Police Diaries. A lot of it is about the climb up, the lean years, the indignities along the way.
The first few years when we didn't have Roxanne and we didn't have Message in a Bottle and Every Breath You Take, Sting hadn't started writing songs yet. We were playing my dumb songs, which were basically bass lines with yelling to get us into the punk clubs and kind of unmemorable. But the amazing thing was how we stuck together. We had a groove. Sting and I were this dream rhythm section, but we didn't have any material yet. And the amazing thing is that he stuck around until Andy joined. When Andy joined, everything changed. Suddenly we were starting to play actual music.
The Andy he's talking about is guitarist Andy Summers.
He had a great gig as a session player, and he threw it all in to join two fake punks in a fake punk band that were going nowhere because the Police was dead in the water. The critics of London spotted us right away as carpetbaggers, and we had zero cred.
What was it in this new punk scene that wasn't jiving? Like, why was there no credibility?
We were a couple of years older. We were actual professional musicians and didn't have that naive charm. For instance, when Andy joined, he cut his hair, which was a big deal in those days. He lost all of his friends. Oh, my gosh, because punk was the barbarians at the gate, destroying everything that's sacred. But he had not yet switched out his bell-bottom jeans. The punk rules were very strict. Thou shalt not wear bell-bottoms. Thou shalt not play songs longer than 2 minutes. Thou shalt not sing love songs. There shall be no guitar solos. And so we didn't actually find our Police sound until we escaped, snuck off to Germany for Andy's last session that he held on to was this German composer called Eberhard Schöner. It was all mixed media. He had a jazz saxophone. He had, a ballerina. He had laser show. And amongst all that, punk band. And an amazing thing happened on opening night of this tour. There was a jazz singer, this girl, who sang out of tune and liked it that way. And there's one point where she walks away from the microphone. There's kind of a dead spot. So old Stingo walks up to the microphone. And we remember Andy and I had only ever heard him shouting. And he walks up and starts just improvising, singing. Oh, my God. Every heart in the building was broken. The birds stopped their singing. I mean, it was just electrifying. And it's kind of when we discovered the musicality that we'd been concealing because of the London critics.
So you were also playing in other bands at the same time as the Police, including a solo project called Clark Kent. And at one point you were thinking that Clark Kent might be a better bet than the Police, right?
Well, this is all in the secret diaries, the grievance nurturing part, where I don't need those guys. My first hit was under the name of Clark Kent, where I sang, I played the drums, guitar, all the instruments, a true one-man band. And by some miracle, the BBC picked it up, and I got on the Radio 1 playlist, which equals hit.
Don't care if you really want to hang around. Don't care because I am the neatest thing in town. Don't care.
And in fact, the first time we appeared on TV was on Top of the Pops, a national pop show. And I'm glad you asked, because now I get to do my favorite brag. The first time the three blonde heads were on TV were as my backing band. Thank you, everybody. You can throw money. That's okay.
And the Police was a famously combustible band. You write, art is very personal, and three grown men locked in a codependent bubble are going to produce sparks, often for the greater good. Can you give me an example of how those sparks created something better than it would have been otherwise?
Well, Stingo wrote a perfectly good song called Every Breath You Take, and he wrote it on a Hammond organ.
I might have heard of it.
Yeah, and it was, you listen to that song, you say, well, that's a hit. But then Andy says, well, by the way, we don't have an organist. We're a guitar band. And so Sting had to put up with Andy taking his song and going and coming up with a really dominating guitar part, which kind of de-emphasized the brilliant lyric in a way, and that was a compromise Sting had to make. And right there, if Andy hadn't put his foot down and created some tension and heat, it would have been a different record.
Every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you.
So all the butting heads, when you look back, was that...
We look back on it, it all had a good effect. You know, I guess we realized eventually, decades later, that we make music for different reasons. I make music to burn down the house. Sting makes music to find a beautiful, serene place. And then this drummer is like World War III, banging stuff here, ruining everything. There's a clash there. He's got this poignant lyric, which requires a little bit of tact and gracefulness and abstinence. And I'm actually discovering that, damn, and this is kind of an uncomfortable discovery. I just discovered that, and don't tell him I said this, by the way. The man's a genius. That's what he was singing all these years.
That's Stewart Copeland. His new book about his early days drumming with the Police is called Stewart Copeland's Police Diaries. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
This message comes from Capital One, offering commercial solutions you can bank on. Now more than ever, your business faces unique challenges and opportunities. That's why Capital One offers a comprehensive suite of financial services, all tailored to your short and long-term goals. Backed by the strength and stability of a top 10 commercial bank, their dedicated experts work with you to build lasting success. Explore the possibilities at CapitalOne.com/commercial, a member FDIC.
I was going to say that the best rock biographies deal with the totalities of a person, the good, the bad, the hard to explain. But that's true of any biography, really. And NPR Music's Ann Powers does all that in her new book about Joni Mitchell. It's called Traveling. And in this interview with Here and Now's Robin Young, they talk about how unfairly Joni Mitchell was treated by the music press, even when they were trying to praise her, but also about some of the more interesting artistic choices she made. Here's the interview.
I am on a lonely road and I am traveling, looking for something. What can it be?
Whether you're 20 or 80, we're willing to bet you've heard Joni Mitchell's music. Maybe you came of age in the late 60s, early 70s with the albums Clouds, Ladies of the Canyon. Or maybe it was her mid-70s turn to jazz with the likes of Herbie Hancock, Pat Metheny, Charles Mingus, Jaco Pastorius.
No regrets, Coyote. We just come from such different sets of circumstance. I'm up all night in the studios and you're up early on your ranch.
But no matter how big a fan, there's a good chance you've just been skimming the surface, according to the new exhaustive inquiry from NPR music critic Ann Powers. The Joni Mitchell she found is the Canadian only child born on the prairies who struggled with the paralysis of polio, then didn't stop moving once she could move. But don't dare think of her as a folky fairy queen born on a lily pad. She made her way in a man's world. She could be acerbic, imperious. She demanded respect. She broke hearts for quite some time. She dressed in disguise as a black man. Was that appropriation? Anne tried to figure it all out. Joni also gave up a baby for adoption. They became acquainted much later. But now 80, slowed by a rare disease and a brain aneurysm, she is the mother to so many female artists. Ann Powers is here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here, Robin.
Well, so much to tackle. You spent 7 years on this. She had this unusual tuning that came from the polio paralysis in one hand. Oh, she had that painting, did most of her covers. Let's just hear a little of the song Day After Day. This is the first composition she ever wrote. She dropped it on her Archives Volume 1, The Early Years, in 2020.
Day after day, miles and miles of railroad track, night after night, humming of the wheels.
And while she was, working the coffee houses in Canada, a Toronto music critic wrote about her high cheekbones, lustrous blonde hair, full lips and brilliant smile. Don't just let the looks of this girl dazzle you, though. Listen to her.
Yeah, well, it sums up something about music writing that's kind of embarrassing to me, a lifelong music writer, which is that even when a male music writer was trying to tell people to go beyond this woman's looks, he was still salivating over her. At the same time, the fact that he felt the need to say, don't just look at her, listen to her, she was remarkable, and people recognized her as such.
She also lived in a community when she, went from Canada to New York and then out to L.A. and to Laurel Canyon. There's Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, Cass Elliot from the Mamas and the Papas, Jackson Browne. But she couldn't play the role of other women. There were groupie women. There were women who were very supportive wives and raising families.
Yeah, well, Joni figured out how to become one of the boys. She always characterized herself in some ways as a tomboy, felt comfortable kind of code switching between feminine and masculine roles and positions. She does that in her music, but I think she was able to do that in her life and make alliances with these guys. Sometimes they were romantic, but oftentimes they were just as crucially creative. It was that total devotion to music making and creativity and art making that drove her and caused her to carve out this space.
Well, let's just take a second. The boys were also lovers, David Crosby, Graham Nash, but then some didn't know Jackson Browne, J.D. Souther, James Taylor, Leonard Cohen. But you know what?
It goes on.
But it does, but I get a little uncomfortable when people write about a woman having those relationships because they leave out that it was the men who were drawn to them, the women. And also, in her case, it doesn't feel like bed notches. These feel like intense collaborations.
Yeah, well, infamously, Rolling Stone magazine made a chart of all the liaisons, the height of the Laurel Canyon scene. Joni's name was on the chart, surrounded by lipstick marks. Why wasn't David Crosby's name surrounded by lipstick marks? She was a studio rat. This was, who she was making music with. And those musical connections are the truly important aspect of her life story. And that's really what I wanted to illuminate.
Right. Well, but just this idea of being a woman, Woodstock comes along and her managers don't want to send her there because everyone thinks it might be too dangerous. So she's sent off to this other gig, protecting her. And she had to watch it on TV, but then she gets the last word, literally.
Boy, did she, right?
Let's listen.
By the time we got to Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong, and everywhere there
It's pretty incredible that she wrote Woodstock just watching on television. I think that is a great example of Joni getting her revenge.
1971, Joni's moving on. She took a break in British Columbia, then Europe. She famously broke up with Graham Nash by letter, but wrote the album Blue, every song you say, claiming her right to be said. My Old Man for Graham Nash, Little Green for the daughter she gave up for adoption. No one knew that at the time. And then A Case of You on the album.
I could drink a case of you, darling, and I would still be on my feet.
I love that it expresses her desire and her sensuality, and not just her heartbreak, and also like kind of toward her virility, you know?
But then River.
I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I wish I had a river so long I would teach my feet to fly.
Well, River is an important song for me, thinking about Joni over her long career, because, you know, such a huge part of Joni's story is this impulse to move on, to escape, reach a place of solitude that would be an antidote, that impulse to skate away. Yeah. Also, of course, it is the great alternative Christmas carol for those people who maybe don't love the holidays, you know, or feel isolated. It's become the standard.
Yeah. Well, from there we go into the late 70s, the 80s, and her jazz turns. This brings us to Joni Mitchell's relationships with Black musicians and with apparently her desire to be seen at times as a Black man. Now, you and others have struggled to understand her dressing in what she described as a sleazy suit and an afro wig, painting her face brown. It's an alter ego she called Claude, then Art Nouveau. She went to a party dressed as a Black man.
So many people let that go, gave her a pass for so many years. And I
because
think,
why? You say gave her a pass because you think it was appropriation.
I mean, obviously it was appropriation. Obviously it was a transgressive act. But at the same time, one that she deeply believed she had the right to perform, you know, because she feels that the spirit of a Black man lives within her, or she has said that many times. It was a time when a lot of white musicians thought they had a right to adopt Black inflection in their singing styles, to align themselves with non-white artists and cultures without recognizing their own privilege. So she was hardly alone in that. But at the same time, that can't be a reason for us to move on without confronting the reality that it happened. This is the same time, Robin, when she's having her most fruitful and deepest collaborations with people like Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock.
Well, there's so much more. There's the music of the 90s. But I just want to jump to her orchestral turn. There were two orchestrated albums. The first one called Both Sides Now. It had Both Sides Now, A Case of You, and Standards. And then 2 years later, another album that was just her songs. That was Travelogue.
I'm so glad you highlight these orchestral albums. And she was working with her, by then, ex-husband, Larry Klein. I mean, it is one of the most ingenious examples of an artist whose voice has changed over time, finding a new setting and a new way to present this more mature, more weathered voice. The arranger, Vince Mendoza, won a Grammy, but also the different tone that she reaches. She is the torch singer now. She is that woman in the dark cafe or the bar with Richard that we met in her song Last Time I Saw Richard. She is that person now.
I've looked at love from both sides now, from a give and take, and still somehow.
Well, and now we come to today. We know that she barely survived a brain aneurysm, but along comes Brandi Carlile, who, helps her ascend to the throne as she sits on now, so fans can adore her.
Yeah. I mean, Joni always appreciated those who thought she was great, but she also always pushed against the system and recognized the kind of artifice and constructed nature of what she called famously the Star Maker machinery. But, she is in a period in her life of gratitude and of receptiveness. I always sense a gleam in Joni's eye, though, that she's laughing a little bit about it, too,
Help me, I think I'm falling in love again.
NPR music critic, author Ann Powers, her new book, A Deep Dive into Joni Mitchell's life, is traveling on bookshelves today. Ann, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this week on NPR's Book of the Day. Let us know what you think. You can write to us at bookoftheday@npr.org. I'm Andrew Limbong. The podcast is produced by Isabella Gomez Sarmiento and edited by Megan Sullivan. Our founding editor is Petra Mayer. The show elements for this week were produced and edited by Erica Ryan, Mallory Yu, Melissa Gray, Fernando Navarroman, Kira Joaquim, Christopher Intagliata, Phil Harrell, Jacob Conrad, Mark Navin, and Karen Miller-Metzen. Beth Donovan is our managing editor. Thanks for listening.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Mint Mobile. From the gas pump to the grocery store, inflation is everywhere. So Mint Mobile is offering premium wireless starting at just $15 a month. To get your new phone plan for just $15, go to mintmobile.com/switch. This message comes from NPR sponsor REI Co-op. For the next 15 seconds, REI wants to remind you that your time is precious and that getting outside to soak up summer is a precious way to spend it. Visit your local REI Co-op or rei.com/opt-outside.